That brings me to the hospital. I'll give you the update at every meeting. I do not see in the report where they actually injected well number 20, monitoring well 20, but it was approved for it to be used as an injection extraction well. Maybe it's just not on their schedule yet. But a couple things did catch my attention. Equipment failures. They pumped the chemical, they did the injection in the monitoring well number 41. The extraction pump froze. The solution wasn't to get another extraction pump, it was to not do an extraction at all. So they notified MDE of that, and apparently MDE did not have a problem with that. I don't understand that. And here's some numbers for you. They told us they would be extracting 2 to 3 times the amount that they injected. They injected in that period, this is injection number 35, and the numbers can be borne out in the email. They injected 4,860 gallons. They extracted 2,813. About half of what they injected. That's not what they told us they were going to do.
And that's the iodisol that they're injecting?
Yes.
So if they're not extracting as much as they're putting in, where is it going?
Hopefully not in our water system, that's right.
That is the $50,000 question. And why isn't anybody concerned about where it's going? MDE in the hospital, when they come and they give the presentations, oh, don't worry, we're going to put it into the ground, but we're taking it right back out. We're going to make sure that we get all of it out. And we'll be testing to make sure we get all of it out. They're not getting all of it out. There's not even a good effort attempt to get all of it out. When you're putting in 5,000 and pulling out 3,000, you know that the numbers don't add up. And we're talking about people with PhDs.
So how much oil are they extracting then?
No measurable oil at all.
But that's the whole point of putting the iodisol into the ground, right?
They told us that the point of putting the iodisol into the ground was to increase the oil recovery. They have not removed 1 measurable gallon of oil during this whole process. They have removed oil detections at 2 milligrams per liter, 4 milligrams per liter, that if you add that up, you can come up with pounds or gallons of oil that were removed, but there's no mass recovery. That entire MySelect system that they have running that removes the oil, that they're pumping all this through, has not removed a gallon of oil. Each and every report says that they have not even seen a sheen of oil in that system. And that begs the question, what's the point of this?
Why do they keep doing it, right?
The point of this, as I think I've said it a dozen times before, this isn't an effort to clean the site. This is an effort to clean the soils around the monitoring wells. And if you look at the numbers that we're getting back, that's all they're getting. The hospital told me at a meeting that there were Bill was there, the hospital's attorneys were there. I'm not sure if the mayor was there. But I said, if there's another method for calculating how much oil is in the ground, other than the EPA paper, the behavior of hydrocarbons in the subsurface, if there's another method for doing it, I want to know what it is. And they said, we'll get it to you. I've gotten nothing.
So what's to stop us from, say, getting approval from MDE to dig our own monitoring wells? Why can't we do that?
We have to have the property to drill them on. We have to have somebody's permission.
Okay.
I think the town's concern is that this process is going to result in MDE being convinced that there's really no oil left in the ground to recover. And I think my concern is they prematurely closed this thing out and there's a lot of oil still in the ground that they haven't recovered. And I think That'll lead us to our next item on the agenda. But, you know, if in fact there's no oil there, then we need assurances that we're gonna be covered in a worst case scenario if this is allowed to be closed out. Because I feel like that's kind of where this is heading, unfortunately.
I think that's been the direction from the get-go. Now, the EPA paper that I keep referencing is available online. It is called The Behavior of Hydrocarbons in the Subsurface. In that paper, it states that in a pump and treat system like this, if you remove 50% of the oil that's in the ground, you have done an outstanding job. If that's true, there's still 87,000 gallons of oil in the ground. It may be adsorbed onto soils. It could be in pockets. We don't know. But if there's another method for calculating how much oil is left in the ground, I can't find it. That is the paper for the EPA. It has their guidelines and their SOPs in it for determining these things. And as much as people say, well, that's not accurate, at MDE, the director said, my guys are experts. You have to trust the experts. I said, EPA's experts too. Why don't we trust them? But it went nowhere. So my concern is, if this is settled, if there's science behind their belief that there's no oil left in the ground, share it. Because all the science I'm able to find says there's still 87,000 gallons of oil in the ground. And that the efforts that they've taken in remediating this oil, they have no mass recovery at all. They cannot say that they've had 1 gallon of oil to take to the recycling center that they got out of the ground.
So is this Ivysaw, they said it was biodegradable. Is that true?
They told us that it was 90% biodegradable in 30 days.
Okay.
But when they put the Ivysaw into the ground, they test for it. It came back at about 250 parts per million. When they tested for it a month later, they still got 100 parts per million.
Right.
That's not 98% biodegradable. 3 months later, they were still detecting Ivysaw. When they stopped detecting it, now I don't know if that's because it did actually biodegrade
Or just traveled.
or it traveled away from the wells. So that's the update on the hospital. The big concern for me is the limited extraction compared to the injections. What they told us was 2 to 3 times the amount that's injected would be removed, and what we're getting is about 60% instead of 200 to 300%. So they know that they're not removing everything that they put in.
So can you go to MDE and tell them? I mean, can we go to MDE and say, this isn't what we were promised? What's Plan B?
We can write a letter, but the way that it's been working throughout these updates is the hospital says we want to do this, MDE says go ahead and do this. They have not been refused anything. There has been the equipment breakdowns that they've been having at the hospital, MDE hasn't shut them down. MDE hasn't said, hey, let's put this on a hiatus till you get some operational equipment in here. Well, 41, they couldn't extract the Ivysaw. Instead of MDE saying, let's pause this until we get that stuff out of the ground. Nothing. None of that is happening. I'm not. The oversight is there in theory, but there's nothing in practice that says that they're actually exercising any operational control over what's happening at the site. They're leaving it to Dane Bauer, a former director at MDE, who's now working for the hospital, to make all the decisions. And all they're doing is nodding and saying, okay. So we can write a letter to MDE stating objections to what's been going on up there and outlining the differences between what the proposed action plan was and the actual plan that they're putting in
Well,
use.
I think maybe we should do that simply because it probably won't get any more action because they're pretty inactive anyway. But what it does is put one more thing on record.
Yeah, I
In
agree.
case something happens, then we have a paper record that we can come back and say, look, in January of 16, we let you know that you were failing pumps.
Who would draft that letter?
I would.
Okay. So, do we want to give Bob to go ahead and draft
Yes,
that letter?
please.
And I'll copy Bill on it, and he'll review it before it gets sent.
The thing that's tricky for us is, this isn't our show. You know, it's generally when this happens, it's between MDE and the polluter. And the problem for us is that we're the ones with the most to lose, but we have no control at the end of the day over the process. So all we can do, I agree with you, Marty, we need to keep a paper trail going. I've explicitly been working with Jen to have every single piece of correspondence we've ever said about this in a file that's this thick now, so that if something were ever to happen to our water supply, we can say, here's the record.
And if you look across the state, where you have situations like this, where people feel like an oil cleanup is not being overseen with enough prudence, it always ends up being a state agency. MDE does not come down on state agencies. You know, if there's an oil leak somewhere, they will make everybody else in that area make sure that they don't have a leak before they ask that state agency to even check.
All right.
And that if you look for newspaper reports, things like that, it'll bear that out. When it's a private individual, MDE is all over it, and they spare no expense to make sure that everything is remediated, that the health of the public is not put at risk. But when the polluter is another state agency, that oversight doesn't seem to be there. That's all I have.
Well, that kind of bleeds into our next item, and, you know, obviously, we're not super excited about the whole Ivy-Sol procedure, how it's being implemented, and I think it's fair to say that we're not super trustful that this is gonna remediate the spill. And to that end, on November 2nd, me and Bill Ingersoll and Bob went to Secretary Grumble's office in Baltimore. I took a day off work. We met with him and his staff, and basically really pushed for a consent agreement between the town, the hospital, and MDE, where we would be basically financially covered in the event of a worst-case scenario. And we basically haven't heard back since that meeting, which was on November 2nd, 2015. And kind of because of that, we also haven't heard anything from the hospital about a possible consent agreement. So in the absence of action on their behalf, we feel compelled to pursue other avenues, basically to cover our tails and protect our citizens from potential contaminants from this site. So along those lines, about a month ago, we approached our state delegation about introducing a local courtesy bill in Annapolis that would basically, on a legal front, on a legislative front, provide financial assurances for the town in the case of a worst-case scenario. So tonight, we've drafted a letter that we plan to put in the mail tomorrow.